but welcome to making a job or career change in a COVID-19 world. That's part of Alumni Engagement's virtual Homecoming at Home that they are offering. This webinar is one of a series that we're providing, particularly relative to the disruptions in the job market that have been caused by the pandemic. But we also want to help VU alumni and students distinguish themselves in the pool of job hunters, help you find opportunities that fit your skills and requirements and needs, and ultimately to interview successfully for those opportunities. During this session, beyond this session, if you have questions, comments, requests for future topics, please send them to us at the Career Center, and our email is career.center@valpo.edu. Our panelists today, as I mentioned, are two experienced Valpo grads, Melanie Mosher, class of 2011, and Jenn Klein, fall class of 2004. I'll let Melanie and Jen introduce themselves momentarily. But first, we know you're going to have questions during this of our panelists, maybe some suggestions, some observations. Anyhow, use the chat box, please, via the YouTube chat box. Type in your questions, and we'll get them to our the moderator, myself, as well as someone else, Stephanie Sepiol in our alumni office, alumni engagement office. And I think Mike Beaver has tuned in too from our alumni engagement office. So we'll try to get to as many of your questions as possible. If you're having trouble with the chat box, you can email your questions to Stephanie at alumni@valpo.edu. And I'll go ahead and let Melanie and Stephanie introduce themselves. Melanie, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Stephanie, for hosting this event, and happy homecoming weekend. So like Tom said, my name is Melanie Mosher, and I graduated in 2011. I studied history and German and also participated in Christ College. I am currently a recruiter at Grant Thornton. Grant Thornton is a Chicago-based public accounting and consulting firm. We have offices around the globe, but we have roughly about 50 offices in the US. About 8,500 employees, and we specialize in tax, audit, and advisory. So the areas that I specialize in for recruiting would be experienced hire recruiters, so anybody coming in usually with 2 years of experience or higher, and advisory and tax is what I'm currently working on. And I've been recruiting, I think now for about 6 or 7 years, mostly in accounting and finance, but also in a couple other areas as well.
Great, thank you, Melanie.
Thank you.
It might be interesting at some point for people to hear how you got into recruiting with your different academic background, but
sure,
maybe a topic for another day too. Jen, would you like to give a little intro?
Yeah, my name is Jenn Kroll. I'm a Valpo grad of 2004, and I basically, after graduating, I actually went into event planning, did that for 6 years, got my master's, and then through connections through event planning, I was able to break into the staffing industry and landed a job with Kelly Services, where I started off as a recruiter for general labor, and then worked my way up to professional technical recruiter in 2012, and have been with Kelly since about 10 years now. I currently, in 2017, took on a new role as a talent supply chain consultant for Baxter Healthcare through Kelly OCG. So I help run their contingent labor program and project services program at Baxter Healthcare in Deerfield. I also focus on a location in Largo and North Cove, which is one of our largest manufacturing sites. That's a little bit about me.
Great. Well, both of you are involved in recruiting and hiring candidates. You meet a lot of candidates. You're seeing the good, bad, and the ugly probably in terms of their preparation, their qualifications. Let's start with a question that a number of our registrants had, and that sort of is, where do you start? How do you begin the job search? If you're ready to make a change or you found yourself unemployed, what advice would you have for our listeners relative to just getting started?
I think Melanie had a really good start for that. Go ahead.
Sure, yes. So I would say there's probably three things I would recommend. The first one, of course, I think is probably the obvious. Put together your resume. Make sure it's updated. Maybe even have somebody else look at it to make sure that there aren't any typos, but also to make sure that you've included everything and that everything makes sense to somebody who isn't in your position, doesn't have your experience, and would be able to read through it. Second, kind of I would say the more philosophical approach to the job search would be to figure out what you're actually looking for. And to some people, well, that seems obvious. They'll say, I'm an accountant or I'm an engineer, that's what I want to do. But there's so many different things that go into finding a job and being happy in a job that go far beyond just the technical skills. In fact, to relate back to public accounting, where I recruit for, there's hundreds of public accounting firms, and you can go file tax returns at any of them. However, even if the work is going to be similar, no matter where you're at, the culture is different, the people are different, the career opportunities may be different. So something that we were talking about earlier, just on some of our prep calls, is to make a list of pros and cons. And I've recommended this to people that really don't know necessarily what they want to do in their next career move. And say on your pros list, do I like what I'm doing? Yes. Okay, so that goes on the pros list. Right now may not be as relevant, but the commute. If you're currently commuting an hour, but you say, you know what, that's too far, which I would assume like most people are remote currently, but say that was your commute pre-COVID. If that's too far for you, then you could put that on the cons list and say, okay, I'd prefer to only commute 30 minutes. So therefore, that's going to narrow down my search. So just make a list of the pros and the cons, anything from, again, technical skills or experience, the people aspect, the types of teams you like working with, what you like in a boss, company culture, benefits, compensation, of course, those are big things. Career mobility, career opportunities, learning and development. Do they pay for things such as certifications or continuing education credits, things like that you can make a list of what's really important to you, what's not. And then after you've made that list of the pros and cons about your current position, go ahead and rank them as far as what's important and what's not. Again, back to commute. Right now, most of us are working remote if we have a position that may be in an office. So if that is going to likely be the way of life, the corporate way of life for at least the foreseeable future, commute may not necessarily be as important. So maybe much lower on your list of ranked items. And then the third thing I would say is leverage social media, particularly LinkedIn. And we can even get into this a little bit later, but there is a feature in LinkedIn where you can go into your profile and do something called to turn yourself on essentially to new opportunities. And it's a button within your profile that you can say open to new opportunities or open to work. And when you turn that feature on, you are then letting anybody who has a recruiter LinkedIn account, which most corporate recruiters, Jen, I don't know if you guys have that in staffing, but a lot of recruiters do have that, and they'll be able to see that you're open to work, and they will be able to filter searches based on anyone who's open to work. So if you're looking for a job, I highly recommend that because that's how you're going to be seen by recruiters.
Melanie brings a lot of valuable points, and I think just to add to that, just a little bit, it is so important to look at this as a positive versus a negative. Easily and quickly, we can automatically go to that negative realm. You got to look at it as a positive. This is an opportunity for you guys, for you to start fresh. And it's important to have that mindset. So the pros and cons list is going to be very valuable, and that's what I recommend as well to people that are looking in the job market. Because I'll get resumes all the time from referrals, and I'm like, well, what do you want to do? I'm like, anything. And I'm like, well, kind of need to know how to help you and guide you. So having an understanding and knowing what you would like to do, that's going to help drive you in finding something that sets you up for success down the road.
How specific does someone need to be with regards to what they want to do? Many people might be willing to do a number of different kinds of jobs. How narrowly do they need to define that from perhaps a recruiter's, interviewer's perspective?
I think a lot of it depends on the scope of job responsibility. So for example, for a lot of the tax positions, and I'll always go back to public accounting just because that's the space I work in, but you have to be CPA eligible or have a CPA depending on the level. So for somebody who has a project management background or an engineering degree, probably wouldn't work because they're not going to be eligible to get a CPA or wouldn't have a CPA unless they've had that career before. So you need to be focused enough so that you know what you would be qualified for. But also there are many jobs that you don't necessarily have to have a very in-depth certification like a CPA or a CFA or a professional engineering certificate. You come from any background. For example, my degree's in history and German, and I'm now in recruiting. Definitely not something, I did not learn recruiting in my history or German degree, but there's a lot of skills that you do learn studying the liberal arts or studying another language that are very transferable into recruiting and can make a very successful recruiter. So recruiting, for example, I think is a great job that somebody can do with any background. So you wouldn't need to have that in-depth technical expertise.
If you do have that in-depth expertise, you can definitely use it. If you do want to try recruiting, it's a good option to do, especially, for instance, if you have a background in engineering, become an engineering recruiter. Mm-hmm. You have a stronger sense and set yourself up for success in finding those candidates because you have an understanding of how technical their backgrounds are and what they are required to do for the job, and help match those skill sets while you're interviewing and talking to people, just as an option. When I see professional technical positions, especially in engineering or science, sometimes it's more industry-based. So for instance, I'm sure you're aware with pharma and medical device, it's very niche. Sometimes they can work out either one or the other, or they are very steadfast because of how much regulation is required for that department. So it depends, and it depends on the industry as well. So for instance, if it wasn't a medical device engineer, that generally managers like to see somebody that's been in that background, or at least from a regulated industry like the automotive industry, depending on if it's manufacturing or if it's more of new product development. It depends. Also with quality engineering too, just to give you a for instance.
Some of the jobs that I've seen recently thank you. Yeah, some of the jobs that I've seen recently where it doesn't necessarily matter as much as far as what your background may be in. I've seen a lot of people become either customer success managers or account managers with software companies. And there's so many different softwares out there on the market right now. And especially with COVID, a lot of them are booming. For example, we've seen Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Skype. They all of a sudden have to beef up their staff because look what's happening. And those skills can be trained. As long as you have good people skills, you can become a good customer success manager. As long as you can learn the technical side of that particular software and then explain that to your customers. That's what usually makes somebody, at least at the core, successful in a position like that. So they don't necessarily, it doesn't matter. I mean, they would love to have somebody who maybe understands technical and maybe has that computer science background. But I've seen people who have a background like that come from psychology degrees or foreign language programs, English, anything, for a variety of programs. So there are definitely a lot of positions where you don't necessarily have to have that background.
How would you advise people to uncover some of those fields and industries, and not necessarily specific job openings, but let's assume that they've gotten a better feel for their skills, their interests, their values, some pros and cons, figuring out what they might like, but they're not sure where to apply it. What field, how would you advise them to uncover and learn more about those industries, occupations, whether it's not-for-profit, which is very broad and diverse, whether it's pharmaceutical industry, whether it's consulting, whether it's whatever the field is, how would you encourage them to learn about possibilities that might be a good match for them?
My recommendation would be networking. But Jen, go ahead.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I'd say definitely once you have an idea of what you're looking for, I strongly recommend, as Melanie mentioned too, is networking is huge. For instance, I can give you a little story for me, how I switched from event planning to the staffing world. The key thing in there is people skills and being able to work with people. And I knew a photographer that came to our events. We would put on large events, private and corporate events, at the facility I worked at. And through them, I made the connection, as well as it didn't hurt that I also was an event photographer on the weekends too. But that's how I made the connection, and I made friends with all the vendors that I worked with, and I set everybody up for success. And by working with them, I let them know, I really wasn't as happy in my current role, and that I was starting to look at opportunities elsewhere. And an opportunity came up in the staffing world, and I'm like, I got to hire a few people on our staff. So I actually enjoyed that part of the process, and I'm like, yeah, let's give it a shot. And eventually was able to be hired by Kelly and started and grow my career from there. And I've been in several different roles. It also helps to understand if you are the type of person that feels more comfortable at a large company or a medium-sized company or a small company where you wear so many different hats. That's definitely something to consider too. Melanie?
Yes. So, and I see the question coming up about how to learn about less obvious types of careers. I think that's something that can definitely be achieved through networking. But also, I've seen a lot of articles posted both on LinkedIn in various news sources. I know Business Insider, New York Times has posted a lot of different things. LinkedIn also, they get a lot of news feed coming in from the major news networks, usually the online print media. And they have a lot of articles about here are some different jobs that you may be interested in. Or I think I saw something the other day about the top 10 jobs of 2020. Most of them involve some sort of remote working technology. Or the companies, I think one that I see often is they're constantly updating a list of companies that are hiring currently. So if you see that a company is hiring in your area, look at their job boards and look through the jobs that they have posted. And what I've noticed is that a lot of companies are now trying to get creative with their job titles. For example, human resources, we're now calling it human capital, or we call it people and community, or I'm seeing people and culture. So if you say, well, I would really like to get into human resources, well, also look at these, find out what the new buzzwords are, such as people and culture or human capital, and then see if you can find different job postings for that. But yeah, like Jen said, networking is huge. I also got into my first recruiting job, but then also my current job just from people that I knew, and it makes a huge difference. And I think especially if you're looking to get into a different type of job compared to what your previous experience is in, knowing somebody and talking to them about their experience and how they got into it, if they're in the type of job that you'd like to be in, I think that can be essential too, because you can figure out how they got into their career path. And you can either take some of the steps that they did, or they can help you take those steps to get into that same type of role.
Even prior to deciding to make the leap into that field, could you talk a little bit maybe about informational interviews? Just sitting down with someone to find out more about their field, so you can determine, say from someone who works in the field, whether you think it might be a good move for you. So you're talking about reading various sources of information. Seems to me talking to people too might be helpful.
Yes. I've done a lot of virtual coffees where somebody I know who's looking for a new position, they'll reach out to me, and I have a lot of friends that know I'm a recruiter, so they say, hey, even if she's not in my field, she can maybe give me some tips or talk to me about a different type of role. And I'm happy to do that, where we just sit down and we get on Zoom for 20 or 30 minutes and just talk about job searching or talk about how to get into a specific area. So just having those sessions with people that you know, that either in person or remote, whatever you feel comfortable with, I think it's very helpful. And like Tom said, you'll find out if you want to do it, because I think it's just as informative to find out what you don't want to do as it is to find out what you do want to do.
So perhaps use those opportunities to ask people what they like about their job, what they don't like, what do they do on a day-to-day basis too? What are some of the challenges?
Yeah. Kind of like a discovery session.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about getting noticed by a recruiter, by an employer. Maybe it dovetails with what we've been talking about, but oftentimes it's difficult to get noticed, to get the interview, to get a response from an organization, agency, firm that is of interest to you, maybe a position you've applied for. Suggestions on increasing the odds of getting noticed and getting a conversation with an employer.
It is, yeah, it's very easy for people to just submit their resumes to any company to be added to a database, but it's more ways to get noticed is starting those conversations. Make sure that you're actually adding content and to using social media that's related to the job that you want to get into, or just showing an element of your interest. I think through social media will also add value, interest in a professional setting. Try to stay, I would say more than likely it's best to stay away from personal interests, especially on LinkedIn. That is more of a professional platform. And make sure that you're also careful with how you're responding, liking things too, when it comes to social media etiquette, because some managers during the hiring process, they do look and they start, unfortunately, human nature, sometimes they start to form an opinion, even though they know based on HR's recommendations not to. But it's just put yourself, the idea is to put yourself in their shoes and if it's meant, I always am a firm believer, and if it's meant to be, it'll happen, as far as if the job's the right fit and the company's the right fit. Melanie, do you want to add anything more?
Yeah, absolutely. And to piggyback off of that, yes, social media is huge. I know we talk a lot about LinkedIn, and I think LinkedIn is a phenomenal tool. I mean, that's probably our number one, other than I'll back up. As far as where we find our candidates at the company that I work at, I would say roughly half of the employees that we hire come from referrals. And then the rest mostly come from people that we have somehow connected with on LinkedIn. And then also some applicants as well. But LinkedIn is a phenomenal tool. So a couple things to keep in mind with what Jen was talking about with social media etiquette. When you go on LinkedIn in your newsfeed and you either like or comment on someone else's post, so again, not even necessarily something that you posted, but someone else's post, that activity will show up on your LinkedIn profile. And something I did want to state, especially given the current political climate, I've seen a lot of people even just like or comment on very politically driven posts on all sides of the spectrum. And some of the comments that I've seen people make are not necessarily, definitely not professional, but I don't think even appropriate to begin with. And again, this is on a professional networking site. And that comment will show up both on your personal profile, but could also show up in the news feed of anyone that's connected to you. So even just today, I saw my news feed on LinkedIn that some people that I've connected with that made some pretty rude and I would say very not good comments. And that makes me think, if this person ever applied for a job at my company, this person's values clearly do not fit with the respect value that we have at my company. So I would be hesitant to bring them forward in the interview process. So I think that as far as I know, somebody asked about what some of the worst examples of LinkedIn etiquette, I would say that's the biggest one, is keep in mind that your comments can be seen by anybody, not just those who are connected to you, but anyone who views your profile. And some of the best profiles, having a good profile picture, I think is important. Also, making sure that your work experience is up to date. My recommendation is that your LinkedIn profile should match your resume. For some people, that's not always the case. Some people only like to go back to a certain point in time on their resume, but will go farther on LinkedIn. If people have volunteer opportunities or side hustles, so to speak, they'll put that on LinkedIn, but not on their resume. So that's up to you. But I think the easiest rule of thumb is just have your resume and your LinkedIn profile match. And then, of course, like I mentioned earlier, turning on that open to work feature within the LinkedIn profile. And there's also, since probably March or April, there's a LinkedIn, I don't know what they call it, like a frame that you can put around your profile picture that says hashtag open to work, and it's green, has a green ribbon on it. And I've seen a lot of people use that, and that really helps you stand out because that green ribbon is very obvious, but even just looking through thumbnails of various profiles. So I'm really happy that LinkedIn put that out. And then I also see a question that says candidates through other platforms. So there, and Jen, maybe you can talk about this too, just given your industry. So we mostly use LinkedIn just because most of the people within the public accounting and consulting and accounting and finance space are on that. However, there are different platforms for different industries. So I believe there's some for tech. There may also be some for healthcare. Again, I'm not familiar with them, but I think there are some for different areas.
There are so many platforms out there. Everybody, I'm sure, is familiar with careerbuilder.com, Indeed, Monster, if Monster is even still out there, to be honest with you. I know that our team used all of those when I was recruiting. I even used LinkedIn free version until I got the paid version. We did use that, but that was more professional technical recruiters received that. There's also a site called dice.com that's specialized for IT. There's also ZipRecruiter, can't remember if I mentioned that, and I apologize if that's a repeat. But there are so many different platforms out there, and there's some specialty platforms as well, especially if you're more creative in finance. There's a platform specific to that, and I would have to, I would have to look that up and provide you with that as a follow-up. But those basically can become an independent contractor for a company, and they basically bid out different roles and for people to bid on that are specializing in marketing, again, technical writing, those type of things. And it's been pretty successful, and it's gaining a lot of ground. But there's several out there. If there's a targeted area, that's definitely worth Googling to research the platforms more. To see, there's also aspects of LinkedIn regarding your skills. And you can take different, you can test your technology skills as well as some soft skills too. And once you pass those get added to your profiles. And there's, I believe, a different merit badge or something that also helps recruiters when searching for different skill sets that are specific. And then there's also, everyone has their own talent acquisition platforms as well. So if there's a particular company that you want to work for, make sure you get your resume on that platform. The other key thing that I wanted to bring up too is any previous interviews for any other companies. If you stay in contact with those recruiters and you happen to be on the job market again, it might be worth reaching out to them to let them know that, hey, I'm in the market again. And actually extending and say, here's my updated resume. If you have any opportunities, great. Just looking to reconnect. Reach out to old recruiters that you've worked with in the past that you feel comfortable working with again. I recommend that. I have people that reach out to me all the time, and then I recommend them to specific recruiters or different companies and stuff to help them find and also act as a sounding board as well. I think Melanie mentioned doing that too. So, I mean, that's another avenue to start networking or finding additional candidates for.
We have a question from one of our listeners or viewers relative to once they get the interview. Mm-hmm. I'll just read the question. Once you get the actual interview, what types of questions should you ask the interviewer to really show that you've done your research on the company? So any tips once you get the interview in terms of being successful there?
Yes.
Well, I know.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Melanie. So on my LinkedIn profile, Kelly Services has actually put some helpful tips together when it comes to interviewing. They have a complete guide, and I've shared that on my LinkedIn profile. It takes you from resume, so talks about social media, to interviewing, and how to prepare for that interview, and different questions that you can ask. Sometimes you don't have a lot of time, but it's good to be prepared for those. But definitely when researching the company, company, make sure that you're looking at the media website and any new updates or exciting things that are happening in the company. That would be important to pick up on and maybe bring it up in the conversation depending on the job that you're applying to and if it's aligned. Melanie?
Yes, I agree with that. And I was laughing because I've had so many people say, so when I ask them what they know about Grant Thornton, my company, they'll say, they'll start essentially what I would call word vomiting verbatim from our company homepage, the number of employees we have, the number of offices, and this, and I'm like, well, it doesn't seem like you've done your homework if you just start repeating the basic about us facts that you'd see on any homepage or Wikipedia page. What I find more engaging is like what Jen said, if you've seen a news article about the company, we have a few charities that we support. We announced a new one a few weeks ago, and a candidate that I was talking to said, hey, I saw that you just started donating to this charity. I think that's great. I've heard of them before. Can you tell me a little bit more about some of your nonprofit campaigns? And I thought that was such a great question for someone to ask. And it showed that they did their homework. And as far as the amount of time that it took them to discover that, as it did the person to memorize the about us facts, probably the same amount of time, but it was a lot more engaging. And some of the questions that I've seen recently, as far as what candidates have been asking me in the interview process, is they want to know about company culture, because that's a huge reason that a lot of people I've seen recently are looking to make a change. What the company has done as far as their COVID response. And again, that stems from a lot of the people that I've talked to are looking to leave their current companies because they don't feel their company has handled the pandemic well. Other people want to know about corporate social responsibility or what we're doing for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And these are all great questions that I think show that you're engaged, but also give an idea to the recruiter of what some of the big factors are in your job search. And some of those factors I'm seeing right now, again, company culture is a huge thing. I'm seeing, I don't know if Jen, you're seeing that as well, but also just the team atmosphere and career mobility, things like that I'm seeing are pretty big factors in people's job searches currently.
Another is how they handled COVID. With their employees as well, and the communication and what they're doing to combat anybody trying to avoid everyone getting sick or contagious. I mean, how the organization handled the communication, making sure everybody was prepared, looking out for their employees, and the approach that they took. That is in the back of everybody's mind right now, and it's definitely something that might come up. And a lot of companies that's a main thing that everyone's still talking about, and they're still creating best practices around it because it's so new.
Yes, agreed. And I'm seeing so many people that have said, I feel like their response or lack thereof or poor handling, however the person thinks their company did handle it, shows a lot about the overall company's values or culture. Mm-hmm. And therefore, that's why they're looking to make a change, or vice versa. I know that I'm very proud of the way that my company has handled it. And I think I thought so highly of our company before, but I think so much higher of them now because they've done a phenomenal job in handling everything.
So are there other red flags along those lines? Well, those are some red flags, how an employer has handled or not handled the COVID situation well. Are there other red flags that you would suggest candidates be aware of, be on the alert for when they sit down in an interview situation where they might get the feeling, this may not be the best place for me, the right fit for me?
Yes, inconsistencies. So if you ask similar questions in interviews with different people and you're getting different responses, even though it should be something that you would think would be across the board, either in that position or at that company, that could be a huge red flag. I know it's hard right now, but with virtual interviews, but I think most companies are probably doing video interviews, body language or tone. And again, I know it may be harder with video or phone interviews, but somebody could be saying, I think our company's phenomenal. We'd had such a great COVID response, or sure, yes, we're on board with corporate social responsibility. But if they don't actually say it, if they're nonverbal cues, make it look like maybe they're just saying this, that could be a huge red flag as well. Also ask why the position's open. And just because somebody left, that does not mean it's necessarily a red flag. There are certain positions that it's typical. I know, I'll say public accounting for one. Again, back to because that's what I recruit for. But it's very common that someone will stay in public accounting for 3 to 5 years and then leave to go to industry. Again, very, very common. So it's not necessarily a red flag if a company is looking to fill a role because someone left, or maybe they left because they wanted to go pursue a startup, or they wanted to go to a nonprofit, or they wanted to change industries. So ask why the position's open. If it seems like a red flag, continue asking some questions until you feel like you've gotten an answer that seems adequate for your decision making.
Yes, definitely ask questions. Maybe they're testing you to see if you're being engaging on the call, but also be intuitive of your gut instincts too, because that says a lot too. And if for any reason there seems to be flags that come up, ask your sounding board that you have and see what their thoughts are and how you interpreted the conversation going with that interviewer. And if they agree that there might be a red flag or a yellow flag, then I think it's definitely just a way to confirm that it might not be the best fit.
And a huge recommendation I have, and I know this is often hard for job seekers, especially when there's a lot of candidates on the market and not as many job openings currently, but ask those tough questions. Even if it means you don't get the job, it's better to not get a job that would have been a really bad fit than to take a job and after 3 months or 6 months or a year find out it was absolutely horrible and not what you were looking for. Because then you could be set back in your career, or you could make another decision that wouldn't be necessarily the best next career move. And I know that seems really hard, but I've had that situation where I've taken a position where I didn't necessarily think, or I didn't necessarily see the red flags or ask the questions I should have, and then realized over time it maybe necessarily wasn't the one that I wanted to be at. And I wish I would have asked better questions in the interview process, or maybe would have stayed at the previous position a little bit longer to see if I could have found something that was a little bit better suited. So definitely ask tough questions.
Both of you alluded to video interviewing and how commonplace it is these days. Do you have any tips for our audience relative to video interviewing remotely?
Yes, I can start. Lighting and background are huge. Definitely make sure that there's no profanity on posters or anything in the background. Pets and kids, that's another one I like to talk about, especially since most of us are at home. Currently, I have very well-behaved cats, but that's not always the case, but I had to lock them up today. And I know you can't always control pets and kids, but if you're able to, if you have somebody else at home that can help maybe keep them calm. Although I will say it sometimes lightens the mood in an interview, because now 6 months into most office jobs working remotely, I think people are used to dogs barking and cats meowing and kids saying, "Hey mom, when are we gonna have dinner?" And I think that's completely fine. But if possible, try to make it as quiet as possible, and also as far as attire. I think things are a little bit more casual now, especially 6 months into it, but it is an interview. So I would still recommend business professional or business casual attire. I wouldn't come to the interview in your pajamas, even if you worked the day in your pajamas and you didn't have video calls. But just remember, it is an interview, even though it is remote.
Same thing that Melanie pointed out.
Okay.
Basically prepare yourself as if you're going to go in person and meet everybody, and just be very conscious of your verbal cues, and be prepared.
Yes. So I see another question that came up, and I love this question about how to communicate salary and lifestyle accommodation requests. I think that this is a great thing to talk about. So if work-life balance or needing to have a flexible schedule to be the at-home teacher or to be a caregiver for a child or a parent or anybody, if that is very important to you in your job search, I would communicate that up front. At least at my company, where we have a great work from home policy, especially currently, but we've done a phenomenal job at working with working parents and allowing them to be able to do well in their career, but also do well as parenting. And I love it when people ask these questions because they want to do well in both life and work. And then as far as salary too, typically that's something I always ask in the first interview, or just like the recruiter screen that I do. And I will always ask what you're looking for. In most states, it is illegal to ask what you're currently making or what you have made in the past. So if somebody asks you what you're currently making, know that that's probably not something they should be asking. Again, check your every state's laws are different, but most states now have made it illegal. So before you go into the interview, especially with the HR person or with the recruiter, think about what salary you'd be looking for. And then provide that range. And you can do your research either based on if it's a job that's similar to what you've been doing, based on where you're currently at, do your market research. There's a lot of different tools online. I know Glassdoor is a big one. They'll often post salaries there. I think Robert Half International, they do their big staffing firm. They do a salary analysis every year for various industries. But yeah, do your research and then communicate your salary expectations usually up front, so that way you don't get to the end of the interview process and get an offer that's far below what you were looking for. And then I see another question about most common platforms that companies use. And Jen, you can add to this if I forget any. I think WebEx, Teams, Skype, Zoom, and Google Meet are the main ones. Jen, have you seen any other ones?
Nope.
Okay.
I have not. Those are the main ones.
Suggestions on practicing using that technology, any of those technologies prior to the interview?
Yes.
So you're suggesting that any particular ways or methods or things they should do as far as that practice is concerned?
So log in if the video
there's...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say sometimes there's YouTube videos. If you're not familiar with the technology, they have those available. And I think Melanie was going to say log in ahead of time to test it out. So,
yes, absolutely.
But go ahead, Melanie.
Yep, that's exactly what I was going to say. Log in 5 or 10 minutes before.
Good advice. Great advice. Other questions from the listeners? Anything else that you want to hear about? And perhaps as they add to the chat box, let me ask each of you another question. Oh, there's one that just came up. What's the best way to follow up after an interview? What would you like to see or hear as a recruiter, as an interviewer from the candidates?
I would like to know, make sure that one of your last questions to the interviewer is, what are the next steps? So that way you have a clear understanding of the expectations, and then ask, when would be good to follow up next to reconnect. Never hurts to ask that question. That way, you're giving them an opportunity to let you know, and kind of set that expectation of when to follow up. Sometimes they get busy, just like all hiring managers get busy with other priorities that pop up or emergencies that they have to remedy as quickly as possible. So it's sometimes they have every intention of contacting you, but then it gets lost in the shuffle because of everything else. So it never hurts to find out what is reasonable for them. So I always encourage that. Melanie, do you have anything else to add?
I agree. And then somebody asks, how long should you wait? I think that depends. Again, like what Jen was saying, ask when you may hear something back. Or typically for me, I usually say usually 3 to 5 business days. But yeah, like Jen said, something may come up. And what I've seen too, unfortunately, over the last 6 months, there's been so much uncertainty that we may have a position where we think we'll be able to hire for this in the next 3 weeks. And then all of a sudden, especially since a lot of our positions are driven by client demand, it may go on hold. And I try to communicate that, but then sometimes when it's on hold, I'll get a message from the candidate and say, do you know when things might move forward again? Sometimes I just don't know. And I'll always respond back and say, unfortunately, I don't know, but I'll let you know. And that's the hard part. I know right now, just because there is so much uncertainty, that a lot of jobs may start moving forward and then go on hold or start moving forward. And I've heard this from a lot of people, not just in the accounting and finance industry, but across different industries, that they've had that experience. So I think being patient and don't necessarily worry if you haven't heard back after a couple of days, but certainly feel free to reach out. I would say definitely don't reach out and send an email every single day. That may be a little bit too much, but if you don't hear back after 3 or 4 days, certainly feel free to reach out again. Also, sending thank you notes post-interview, I think, is something that has been lost over the last few years.
Yes. It does. It helps significantly. It shows your level of interest. So make sure you put a little bit more substance in that thank you note, other than just, hey, thanks for the interview. It was great meeting you. It looks like a great company. You put a little more substance in there, more context around what you talked about, just to refresh the manager's memory of what you did talk about and your skill set. And case in point with if a position does go on hold, it doesn't mean it may be on hold forever. So if something does go on hold, then ask that question. So, hey, when do you think would be a reasonable time for me to follow up just to check in, or to update you on my level of interest too? That doesn't hurt. That way you're leaving the communication doors open to future opportunities even, and just a new networking connection.
Absolutely. I agree. Great advice.
Do you care how they follow up with you, whether it's through an email, a handwritten note, any which way?
I prefer email.
Okay.
I don't think there's really, I would just ask if there's a preference. I know I'm a phone person versus an email person any day of the week. Thank you notes don't necessarily have to be handwritten these days. They can totally be emails as well, a nice written email. I know I always encourage that from our candidates that interview.
I would advise, if you were thinking about doing a handwritten note and actually mailing it, it may not actually reach the person you want it to go to, because if they're working from home and haven't been in the office in 6 months, it may not get to them.
Good point. Good point. Well,
I think there was a question about how long you should wait. Is it wait for the job to open up, or kind of want to understand that one a little more?
In terms of following up after the interview.
Oh, okay.
How long you should wait before you follow up?
Got it. Okay. So generally, thank you note, ask the question, when can I follow up? And if 3 to 5 days, based on what Melanie said, I agree with that as well. And then ask that question as far as, is it possible for me to follow up? When would be a good time?
It probably varies from industry to industry and person to person, but is there a general length of time, an average length of time that you think someone should anticipate relative to the length of their job search? How long do you think it's going to take someone to make a job change or find a new job? Any general observations or advice there, so that their expectations are maybe in line with reality?
That's a hard one for me to answer. Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, thanks. It's going to depend on the industry right now due to COVID. And so a lot of candidates, and this is what I would always recommend to the candidates I was working with as a recruiter, you can't wait for the customer. You need a job. So it's always best to have, to be applying to multiple jobs to see what pans out. And you know what, if it comes, you take another job and this other one comes to fruition and they offer it to you, maybe that other job's not working out so well. And this was a blessing in disguise, and it was just a matter of time before this opened up again. It's best to keep your options open, but when you're working with recruiters, I can't stress this enough, it's best to be honest with them, because they're the ones that are going to help you. So let them know if you're actively searching and if you have more than one iron in the fire, so that way they can best help and guide you and help you.
Yes, I completely agree. General rule of thumb is usually the higher level positions, it's going to take longer to get through the process than lower level positions. But again, in this market, everything has changed. It's very, very weird right now. Just to give you context, so we were working with some phenomenal candidates back in March and April, and then of course everything went on hold. we were finally able to get an offer approved within the last month. So I know that that's a very long time, but we kept in touch over time, and that's not typical either. I mean, usually it doesn't take that long, but because everything shut down essentially in March, and we had to get certain approvals and make sure that there was demand and everything for the position, it can take a long time. So again, just be patient. Something else I wanted to say to ask in the interview process is, I'm starting to see that there's a lot of companies posting a lot more jobs, especially because I think a lot of companies anticipate they'll do hiring starting January 1st for calendar year 21. So I think it's a very valid question. Jen, maybe you can provide input on this too. If you ask, so you have the job posting out there currently, are you looking to fill this position immediately? Or is this something that you are looking to fill in the future? And if so, when? Because what you don't want to do is interview for a job and then find out they never had any plans at all to fill it until January 1st. And looking at almost October 1st, that's a long time. Also, at least for some industries, that there's not as much hiring between Thanksgiving and Christmas. So if you are structuring your job search, keep that in mind too, where you may want to make a pretty big push currently. So that way you can hopefully plant some seeds in different areas and hope that they grow before Thanksgiving, because again, you may not be able to have a whole lot of traction between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And also for start dates as well. So that's something that we're looking at too. Some companies also, even if they have an offer out before Thanksgiving, they may not want to have anybody start between Thanksgiving and Christmas, just because there's a lot of people out of the office, or clients may not necessarily be as busy then. So keep that in mind too. But yes, certainly ask the question for sure. Is the job open currently, and when do you plan to fill it?
Yeah, everything that Melanie said. The biggest thing right now, especially for, like, for instance, for contract roles, usually those are pretty immediate fills. So definitely ask the recruiter at the time that you start talking to them, when is the plan to fill it? Generally, at least in the medical device and pharma industry, once the manager gets the budget and we have the job out there, we can move very quickly. Case in point, I had a leasing accountant position that became available, and literally within 2 weeks or less, I was able to fill it. We have an offer, and we even have a backup candidate ready to go. So for that project, so we can move quickly. It all depends on how many great candidates we get in.
Mm-hmm. Yes, agreed. And Jen, actually, you just said the word contractor, which made me think. So if you're not currently working, I would say definitely explore contract opportunities. They're a great way to gain some experience. Like Jen said, they usually start much quicker than full-time opportunities, because you don't have to go, usually you wouldn't have to go through a notice period or a full onboarding period like you would with a full-time position. And even if they're not necessarily going to be that long term, sometimes they do go permanent, or even if it's just a 2-week or a 2-month thing. Again, it's income, it's experience, and networking too. A lot of people that I've talked to, even if it was a short-term contract role that didn't even end up going permanent, they met someone at that company who then referred them to somebody else who then became their next employer.
It's a great way to keep your skills fresh, as well as learn new ones when you're on the job. Again, the networking point, it's so significant. A lot of these companies, if you're performing well, they're not going to let you go. They will find other work for you or other projects, or introduce you to a different department. That happens a lot in our area. So it's definitely a viable option, especially if you're looking to test the waters in a certain area and you're just not sure 100%, that would be another good option to go with.
Good advice.
Absolutely.
Makes a lot of sense. Both parties get to test each other out a little bit.
Yep.
It sounds like candidates need to be patient in the search, persistent, professional, and polite.
Oh, yes.
All great attributes. Yes.
Yes. And professional at the same time in their communication.
Right. Well, we need to wrap up. I want to keep an eye on the clock for everyone's sake, but is there anything else either of you'd like to say, just kind of in conclusion, anything we maybe haven't covered that you think would be important to the Valpo alumni listening?
So Tom,
We'll
something
be
we
happy.
chatted about on Monday.
Go ahead, Melanie.
Okay, thanks. So something I wanted to talk about would be leveraging the alumni network. So Tom and I had discussed in a prep call for this, using LinkedIn to find other Valpo alumni and then reaching out to them. So something that we had explored on LinkedIn would be finding a target company. I think we had looked at some of the companies that Valpo heavily recruits from campus, or sorry, that these companies recruit from Valpo for campus hires. So there's going to be a lot of employees who graduated from Valpo and now work at this company. So if you see a company that you're interested in, you should be able to search under the people function on that company's page. I think if you put in Valparaiso University, it should pull up the profiles of people who work at that company who have Valpo listed as their education. And then even if you don't necessarily know that person, I would say feel free to send that person a note and say, I'm really interested in working at this company. You and I both graduated from Valpo. Would you be open to having an online 15-minute coffee? I'd love to find out more about the company and if they're hiring. I know that I've been happy to have a chat with anybody about just job searching or about coming to my company. And I think having that Valpo connection is huge, and definitely leverage it.
Yeah, and I think it might be safe to say, Melanie, too, that if you find us on LinkedIn and want to connect, we welcome that. We'd be happy to help out fellow alumni and see what we can do, and hopefully we'll be able to help you make your next career move.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks to both of you. One other thing on the Alumni Career Network, we have a program, a network, Alumni Career Network called ValpoConnect, powered by Wisr. And any alumni and current students can access it, can set up a profile on there. Currently, there are about, I believe, 1,300 VU grads who have set up a profile on there, and they're willing to help other Valpo alumni and current students, for that matter, with various aspects of their career planning and job searches. And that can be found, ValpoConnect, powered by Wisr, can be found on the alumni engagement site, website of the university. So VU's alumni engagement site has the ValpoConnect link, and so does our website too, the Career Center's website. So we would encourage you to use that too. That's a little more proprietary, right? Everyone on LinkedIn is kind of seen by the world, which is fine and good. And there are thousands of people, well, probably millions of people in total on LinkedIn. The nice thing about ValpoConnect is these alumni have raised their hand, voluntarily gotten on there and said, yes, I want to help other Valpo folks. So it's a pretty cool network, and we would encourage students and alumni to actively use that as well. Melanie and Jen, thank you very much for your help. Thanks to the Alumni Engagement Office for helping arrange this and set this up. But Melanie and Jen, we really appreciate your time, your expertise, and your interest in Valpo and helping out other folks here.
Absolutely, and thank you, Tom and Stephanie, for setting it up.
All righty.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Have a good day.
Evening.
Thanks.
Stay safe.